Ajumogobia, and I am the Executive Director of the Sahara Center. The Sahara Center is a not-for-profit organization that operates at the intersection of research and policy, and our work is to drive the advancement of the creative industries in Nigeria. And today on our conversations at the Sahara Center is Sotonye Amachree, who is a legal practitioner and has been in active legal practice for 17 years. So she was called to the Nigerian bar in 2004. She is also an accredited mediator by the Lagos Multi-Door Courthouse and a senior associate with the law firm Ajumogobia and Okeke. Sotonye has extensive practical experience in commercial litigation, arbitration, and has worked on several cases for the firm's multinational and local clients. And she also has extensive experience advising clients on their contracts to ensure that their business transactions work smoothly in our fast-paced business world. So welcome, Sotonye.
Thank you, Ado. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And so today, Sotonye has very kindly agreed to talk to us about intellectual property rights as they connect to the creative industries. So I guess we'll start with the first question, which is, can you just tell us a bit about what intellectual property rights are?
Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity once again. Before I start to respond to intellectual property rights, it will be important for us to understand what intellectual property is first. So that's the foundation before we go to the next step. So I'll start with that. Intellectual property itself is the creation of the mind, any work that comes from your mind, right? Just as the name implies, from your intellect. So I'll describe it as intellectual goods. For example, just as you have your physical goods, you have your intellectual creation, something that is original to you. So that's what intellectual property is. So, well, it's quite interesting that when it comes to traditional property, regular property, we are usually more comfortable and we take steps to protect those rights, or rather those properties. So for example, your house, your car, you would protect them because these are tangible properties that you have. But for a lot of people, especially creatives, they find it very difficult to, first of all, appreciate the fact that the work that comes from their minds or their intellect are so important and so valuable, such that it is crucial that you take steps to protect your intellectual property. So in a nutshell, very simple way of putting it, that is what your intellectual property is.
Oh, thank you. I had never thought of it like that in terms of seeing it actually like a good, and a good that, because like you said, the physical property, we take a lot of care towards ensuring that you speak to the lawyer, you have the right documentation. But then whenever it comes to that intellectual part of it, I hadn't ever considered it in that way. So that's a good way to think about it. And can you just share with us, from your own experience, why it's important that these rights are protected, and how do you try to what do you do about your intellectual properties rights? So now we know we have rights, we know we have intellectual property. So, okay, what do we do next?
Okay, so that's really very interesting. So now you know what intellectual property is, what you do with it. First of all, you have to be conscious of the fact that you have intellectual property, and you have to ensure that it is protected, right? So just like you have your traditional texts, that's the same way your intellectual property can also be infringed. So that's the term we use for intellectual property. The infringement of an intellectual property is when it is, of course, someone has, in regular terms, you say stolen your intellectual property. So what do you do, to prevent such situations? The first thing is to ensure that you have registered your intellectual property. In Nigeria, we have the law that makes a lot of provisions for protection of intellectual property, and that's the Copyright Act in Nigeria. So there are several provisions in the Act that helps to protect intellectual property generally. But for the purpose of this discussion, if I have to narrow it down to intellectual property for creatives, right? There are different types of intellectual property. So for creatives, basically, we're looking at literary works, musical works, artistic works, cinematograph, films, broadcasts, for instance, as well as some other works that have to do with, anything that has to do with creative abilities. It just comes under that definition for the kinds of works that are eligible for copyright. So if you have any form of creation that comes under any of these categories, you can actually have them registered at, the Nigerian Copyright Commission for you to have the legal basis for your copyright. So ordinarily, the fact that you have come up with an idea and you have created something, copyright comes to you automatically, just by virtue of the fact that you have been able to create something from your mind, But it is advisable that the second step beyond that should be registration as required by the Copyright Act, so that you have that legal backing. It's so important that you have the legal backing for your copyright. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at now is the fact that it is an intellectual property. There's certain parameters that are required for you to be able to register it. So first, I would say it has to be original. That's so important. It has to be original. It is an idea or a creation from your mind that came from you as a person, as a creative. It wasn't copied from any other source. That's so important. And then the second point is that it has to be fixed. That's also a requirement under the Act. Fixed means that it has to be translated from that creation, that idea in your mind, into something tangible, that people can actually have access to, something that is tangible. So that's, those are the conditions that you require to have them, your copyright registered. It's so important for it to be fixed. So I'll give an example. If you're, as a musician or a band, you're performing in public, right? You have a live performance. That live performance, after you're done, cannot be described as fixed until you, for instance, record it. So there's a phone recording that performance, or there's some form of conversion of that performance into a tangible. So for instance, a hard drive in a computer, somewhere it is stored, then it is fixed. Then it is eligible for registration. So, it's really wide, but just to answer your question, this is what it is, basically, what you should do. And so I talked about the first step, which is registration. The second step is to ensure that, of course, you guard against infringement. So registration allows you, under the law, to file for redress in the event that your copyright has been infringed, right? So you need to have that legal backing. You are the owner of the copyright. However, if it is infringed, the only way you can institute legal action, for redress is if, you have the legal backing, which comes by way of, registration of the rights.
Can I just take you back a bit? Just quickly, when you say infringement, what does that even mean? So how do you, what does it mean to be, for your rights to be infringed?
So when I say your right is infringed, your right has been used without your permission. So your right has been, used. So for instance, your property now has been used without your permission. So we see a lot of it around us here. Let's say a movie is produced, right? And then you have, we know what happens in Nigeria. There's certain classes of people who just go without permission and they begin to reproduce it into copies, multiple copies, millions of copies, and they're selling it, at, whatever rates they fix to it. Now, that is not the original, right? But it is now, what we call piracy in our climate here. It's very common. So that is an infringement of the copyright, which is exclusive to the owner,
Okay.
So ordinarily, for you to be able to reproduce an original work, you need, if you are not the owner of the copyright, you need the permission of the owner of the copyright, which we describe as a license for you to be able to make use of it, reproduce it, display it in public. For you to use it in any way, you need the license from the owner.
Okay, then the reason I'm saying this is that because this is a real general introduction to understanding it, it's also the sense that people can use, like you've mentioned, your product, but it could also be something that looks like it or sounds like it. So it could be a design type, it could be a trademark issue, right? It could be the logo, but could it also be like the idea? Or because I also find that sometimes there's a fine line between something that looks like and something that is exactly. Does that also apply? So if somebody has kind of copied what you've done, but then redone it in their own product, does the intellectual property also apply there?
Yes, it does. It does. The thing is, so there are different levels to it. Sometimes when people infringe, they infringe partially. It may not be the entire work, but once you can prove that a part of your work, whatever part of it, no matter how small, has been used by someone else without your permission or without you giving a license, then an infringement has occurred. So you will need to prove, that aspect of your work that has been infringed in the event that you have to go to court to seek redress.
Okay, and in terms of doing that, right, they'll have to come to a law firm, or is it a consumer? I mean, is it a creative protection agency, or is it to come to a law firm like yourself to work with you through that? Because I guess the burden of proof is on the owner of the original intellectual property.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You're correct. So I just want to say that, in responding to your question, of course, I mean, if you have to institute a legal action for infringement, then you would need us. You would need the lawyers. We are the ones that you need to come to, for us to institute an action on your behalf, to seek redress. In Nigeria, the Federal High Court is the court that has jurisdiction, to adjudicate over copyright issues, including infringement, right? So it cuts across the different aspects. When we talk about intellectual property rights now, I could mention 4 categories. So copyright, which is what I've started with, is one of them. We have patents, we have trademarks and trade secrets, right? So wherever it comes under, you have, for the owner now, the owner, an exclusive licensee or an assignee are those who are eligible under the law to institute legal action for infringement of copyright.
Right. Okay. So I'll try and put that in layman terms. So basically, if you're the person that registered for the creator of the intellectual property, then you're the person that can then come and say that somebody has infringed on it, and you can hold them accountable. And I know that you can't, just before we wrap up, I know that you can't really share with us specific cases, but can you share, because another perspective is that, in Nigeria, you think to yourself, goodness, do I really want to go to court? This might take many years, etc. Can you share examples of when something has, someone has been able to successfully hold someone accountable for their intellectual property, either in the music sector or in the film sector?
Oh yes. So that was in 2018, if I recall correctly. Blackface. I mean, the musicians, I come across their names from time to time, when we have to discuss this topic. But I recall that Blackface had instituted an action at the Federal High Court, claiming that his songs had been infringed. The action against, if I recall correctly, it was against EME Records. So that includes Banky W and Wizkid. Oh, so wow. It was in the news at the time. And he had said that, look, the songs that, the respondents, the defendants had been using were his own songs. And of course, knowing that Wizkid had really, was really successful and still is one of our most successful artists in Nigeria, had one of his songs on his album. So that was a case where he wanted to enforce, or rather seek redress for infringement of his copyright, So, but that's one aspect. The other aspect would be, was he able to prove that indeed, he's the one that has the copyright to those songs, right? So that brings me to something that is so important. When you talk about instituting legal action, the owner has to be in a position where they're able to prove their claims. So under Nigerian law, he who asserts must prove. So if you assert that your intellectual property has been infringed, you must be able to prove before the courts that indeed you're the owner. That's the beginning, that's the start point. And that's why I talked about registration. So that's the benefit of registering your copyright, because that way you are now able to present something, present your legal protection, that's what it is, before the court, right? That's what entitles or proves to the court that indeed you're the owner. That's the start point. So until you're able to do that, you cannot now claim that somebody has infringed a right, which you cannot even prove is validly yours. You get what I mean? So that's the importance of having your registration done, because that is indeed your legal protection. In the event that an infringement occurs, that's the only way. So the truth is, if you don't have that, it's difficult for a lawyer to even help you. Even if you approach us, you may tell us, oh, but it's my song. Yes, we know it's your song. You can even show us somewhere where you wrote it down when the idea first came. What steps did you take to protect your song? It's so important. So for this case, he had filed and he said something very interesting, referring to blackface. He said something very interesting. He said that it's his song, but he didn't know that music is something that is a business, that he sees it as an art. So he didn't expect that, this kind of situation will occur, and that he was really surprised that he would find himself in this kind of situation and all of that, which, it's actually something that happens to a lot of creatives. I've met, one or two who focus on art, focus on the gifts they have, and which is beautiful. They give it their best, they create, wonderful work, but then they lack requisite knowledge that they need to protect these works. So it's so important to actually pay attention to this and ensure that, you do all that is required within the law to have your intellectual property adequately protected.
Thanks for that. And I guess my final question, because you've given us quite the importance of taking the steps to do that. But also, I work as a researcher, and I see contracts sometimes that ask, when you're reading through your contracts, can you tell us some things to watch out for? Because sometimes I've seen a contract that tells me that they own my intellectual property before all previous and future intellectual property rights. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but already that just sounds, I have to take caution and say, what do you mean by this? And ask for the clause to be removed. Because I just think, how do you then, from doing this project, which is a 3-month project, then want to own all my previous and future intellectual property? Can you just, explain to people a little bit about what to watch out for when they're trying to sign contracts as well before we close?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because these are the challenges that creatives face on a regular basis. First of all, I want to say, whatever business transaction you're going into, ensure that you have a contract. So first of all, I find that some creatives don't pay attention to having contracts for their business transactions. They just focus on the moment, oh, I need to do this, and I'm just moving with it, and I'm not watching my back. Having a contract is a way of watching your back, actually, having a professional hold your hand to negotiate contracts with you. And at the end of the day, the whole idea is to ensure that you get the best deal. You're getting the best offers, the best situation, to cover you in the event that something goes wrong, right? It's so important. So for contracts, you have to now look at the title of the intellectual property that is involved. So for instance, I think I should start by saying that intellectual property is also transferable. Just like you can transfer your regular property, it is actually, a transferable asset. You can assign it from one person to the other, right? So that can happen multiple times. So for instance, I have intellectual property. There's a music I created or something, and I want to assign it to somebody else. I can decide to assign all of my rights in that music, the use of it fully to their assignee, So the assignee can subsequently assign to somebody else. So that's a third party. And that's how it goes, right? Because as long as you have the full rights to deal with the property as you wish, you can assign to different people at different times. That's why in certain situations, you may be going into a particular contract, and the intellectual property that you're about to either transfer or receive has already been transferred before. So it's important that you actually investigate. So that brings me to the second point. Investigate the title of that property that you're about to acquire. Find out, is there any form of encumbrance on it? I mean, has it been used before? Is there something, for instance, you must ask, is there a lawsuit? Is there something that, must have happened in the past that I need to be aware of? You ask a lot of questions, It's also helpful to conduct a search at the Nigerian Communications Commission, because of course they have the records, should have the records, So it's also a good place to start. Go first of all, find out, get all the information that you can before you begin to sign the dotted lines. And of course, I cannot overemphasize this. I mean, the need to have your legal person with you, a lawyer, to actually help you review the contract, because some of the contracts do have some clauses, that may not be in your favor. So it's important to also ensure that, the certain clauses are also included in the contract to protect you. So for instance, confidentiality, you need to have a confidentiality clause or agreement. You may need to have a non-disclosure confidentiality. You may need to have different, whatever it is for that particular situation, for that intellectual property, you have to ensure that there are clauses that are adequate to protect you. That's it basically for contracts. And I should add that for team members that work with creatives, it's also very important. As a creative, ensure that you have contracts for each of your team members. So for example, your personal manager, business manager, your agent, and then of course, even your lawyer. So this practice of having team members, just, roll with you, you're a celebrity, maybe they're related to you, maybe your cousin or your friend, and you don't even bother to ensure that, proper contracts are signed between you. I mean, down the road, yes, from the beginning of that relationship, you may have issues, begin to have issues, and then that's when you now see conflicts happening. But if from the onset, you've entered into a contract and there are clear terms stated, in terms of percentages for incomes that will be earned on both sides. So, for example, you have an agent, he's the one who sources for, your work. And you need to have clear statements in your contract to say, oh, he's entitled to maybe 5-10% of your gross earnings, as a creative. Those are things that you need to put in place. So tomorrow is not a question of, he may begin to claim something much, much higher than what you expect. And you're like, oh, wow. So especially for the younger ones who are not really exposed to some of these things, they could be exploited by, some of their team members. We always advise, that contracts should be taken seriously, reviewed properly, clauses properly looked into to check if they're actually in your interest, and where there are clauses that need to be included in the contract, then those clauses should be included to ensure that you're adequately protected as a creative.
Thank you so much. I feel like we've gotten quite a lot from you in terms of the intellectual property, but also in terms of even contracts. And this is, I think that this is quite extensive for you to be aware of all the things you need to think about. But the idea is not to scare you, but to inform you so that you know, but also to know that there's help at hand. And so Sotonye has kindly told us, that Ajumogobia and Okeke are at hand to also assist with this. So in the notes, we will put her details and the details of the organization's website. And, some people might be wondering if it's possible for them to access, because again, money fees are important, but just to let you know that part of what we're also doing is to see how we can make expert legal advice accessible to the creative industries. So those are some of the work that we're also doing behind the scene. And so again, don't think that, oh, I need to save a small amount of money and then you rob yourself of the potential of somebody infringing or having the wrong contracts, because we're not trying to scare you, but also to provide the right information to you. Thank you so much, Sotonye. I feel like I've learned a lot, and this is someone that has, business law. I have business law as part of some of the courses that I have done. But again, specialists and experts is different, right? So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Aju.